The clock struck 4. Its ticking echoed like a quiet hammer through the deserted parking lot, each second dragging across the cracked pavement, glowing faintly under a lone, flickering street lamp. A battered Honda sat crooked in the far corner, paint peeling, tires dusted with dried mud. Inside it, a man stilled himself. He pulled the brim of his cap lower and drew in a breath that was part resolve, part resignation. His hand gripped the rusted handle of a janitor's cart, its wheels squealing forward as he stepped into the biting wind that whispered through the diner's rear entrance. The hinges groaned as he pushed the door open, a sharp, aching sound that broke the silence like glass. Then came a voice, soft, brittle, nearly broken, humming a tune so fragile it seemed stitched together from grief. He froze in place. Years ago, Jackson had stood at the back of a kitchen like this, at an age when most boys were still dreaming. His hands had been raw from hot water, skin split by chemicals, fingernails dark with grease that never fully scrubbed off. The smell had stayed with him, a stew of burnt oil and old soap that sank into his pores, into his breath. The chaos of the kitchen had been constant. Dishes shattered, pans clanged, orders were screamed over his head like gunfire. Noise became his world, merciless, unrelenting, and yet it was in that crucible that his hunger took form. Not for food, but for something better. For proof that he could endure and rise. They laughed when he said he wanted his own place. Family, friends. A lifetime of dirty plates? They scoffed. But every broken dish taught him to persist, and every insult hardened the steel inside. He dreamed not of fame, but of seeing his name above a door, to turn survival into legacy. His first restaurant collapsed within a year. The savings evaporated, his pride with it. He survived on instant noodles for 6 months, stretching every penny until it snapped in his hands. Still, he didn't quit. Failure was the teacher success could never be. He rebuilt, not with fanfare but with quiet determination. One night, one brick at a time. 15 years later, the Harrington brand boasted 23 locations across 3 states. People called him a builder, a man forged from grit. But Jackson never forgot the scalding sting of dishwater or the heat of mockery. The boy who scrubbed pans still lived inside him, whispering what it meant to labor without praise. That boy was why, instead of sitting in a conference room, he was now pushing a janitor's cart into a struggling diner. Murphy's was bleeding, bad reviews up 40%, staff quitting in waves, profit margins collapsing into red. His CFO said it was time to cut the cord, shut it down, move on. But Jackson had learned to listen beyond numbers. When a place stopped feeling alive, when workers drifted out and customers grew colder, something deeper was dying. You could replace fryers and repaint walls, but you couldn't fix a poisoned culture with spreadsheets. So he did what no one expected. He bought a junk car with over 200,000 miles, left his tailored suits behind, and became invisible. No titles, no spotlight, just Jackson Johnson, a name bland enough to disappear. With a second-hand cap and a cart cobbled from hardware store scraps, he returned not as a boss, but as one of the forgotten. He didn't want sanitized reports. He wanted to hear the muttered frustrations between shifts, the confessions shared over cigarette breaks, the truth, unfiltered. Inside Murphy's, the air felt thin. There was a silence that didn't belong, not the peace of a closed night, but the silence of something missing. He saw her at a narrow table, burgundy aprons folded in perfect stacks. The flickering overhead light painted her skin pale, casting tired shadows under her eyes. Her hair was pulled back without care, strands falling loose to frame a face far too young to carry that much sorrow. Her hands moved with delicate repetition, smooth, fold, press, like she was folding her hope into the fabric itself. A faint melody slipped from her lips. Fragile, cracked, not sung for joy, but from a place of longing, as if she didn't expect anyone to hear. Jackson stepped closer. The cart's wheel clattered and she startled. The rhythm shattered. An apron fell to the floor. She gasped and lunged for it, whispering, "I'm sorry," with the kind of voice that apologized not just for a mistake, but for existing. He shook his head gently, the brim of his cap shadowing a faint smile. "No need," he said, though the words caught in his throat. There was something in her, something guarded and bruised. Her hands shook slightly as she restacked the aprons, avoiding his gaze, as if she believed perfect folds could protect her from imperfect truths. He lingered, feigning interest in the cart's alignment. But deep inside, something stirred, a small, persistent seed of curiosity. Who was this girl folding aprons at 4 a.m. like it was sacred? And what weight was she quietly carrying in that silence nobody else seemed to notice? There was something in the way she folded each apron, something almost sacred. It wasn't just habit, it was ritual. The sadness in her quiet humming, the focus in her hands, it all whispered of a deeper story, one no spreadsheet or quarterly report could ever hold. Jackson couldn't quite name it, not yet, but something inside him stirred. This girl wasn't ordinary. Whatever truth hid beneath the cracks of Murphy's, it started here, with her. He shifted the mop handle in his hands, clearing his throat gently. "I'm new here," he said, voice low, confessional. "Just the janitor, Jackson Johnson." She looked up, the faintest smile brushing across lips that looked like they hadn't smiled freely in a long time. "I'm Tessa." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, still clutching the apron, against her knees like it was a lifeline. "Welcome. It's not much, but it keeps the lights on." "You come in this early every day?" he asked, though something in her demeanor already told him the answer. "Sometimes," she replied softly. "I like making sure everything's ready before the others get here. Feels better when the place starts right." Her voice was calm, but carried a weight that hinted she'd seen mornings far heavier than just prep work. As she spoke, her hands never stopped. Smooth fabric, fold seam, press flat. There was a strange comfort in her precision, and a quiet pride when she continued, almost as if reciting scripture. "Mrs. Patterson comes in at 7. Coffee, 2 sugars, just a splash of cream. Tommy from the auto shop, he's particular about his eggs, over medium, not too runny. And Sarah Chin's little girl, grilled cheese with extra pickles. She never eats them, but she likes building little towers out of them." Jackson blinked. It wasn't the words that stunned him. It was the care in them. She wasn't just listing orders. She was remembering people. Their habits, their quirks. Not just as customers, but as living, breathing humans. "You really remember all that?" he murmured. Tessa's smile widened for a moment, a flicker of pride. Then it faltered. "It helps," she said with a shrug. "Makes them feel seen." Her eyes darkened for just a breath, and then she added quietly, "It pays the bills, too." The words slipped out fast, unguarded. She caught herself. I do love it. The customers are wonderful. Most of them." Her voice dipped near the end, her gaze dropping to the apron, fingers brushing over it as if smoothing invisible flaws. She smiled again, but now it was one of those customer service smiles, perfectly measured, practiced, hollow around the edges. Jackson watched, feeling an unfamiliar tightness settle in his chest. There was light in her, but it was dimming. He noticed what her carefully chosen words tried to bury. Her uniform was faded, elbows thin from too many washes. The hem had started to fray, curling at the ends like tired whiskers. Her shoes were clean, but cracked along the sides, the leather giving way under the pressure of too many steps. Even her apron bore signs of quiet repair, a strap mended with near-invisible stitches, hand-sewn by someone too proud to ask for help. Her hands trembled as she folded, but she pressed harder into the fabric, as though anchoring herself in the motion. She spoke again, her voice steady but distant. "Some guests can be difficult," she said lightly, like reading from a script. "But that's normal. People are people." Her laugh followed quickly, thin, brittle, vanishing before it fully formed. "And everyone here?" Jackson asked. She hesitated, just a second. But enough. "They're good," she said too quickly. "Really, everyone's good." Her eyes dropped back to the fabric. She smoothed non-existent wrinkles with exaggerated care. And in that flicker of silence, Jackson saw her mask falter. A storm passed through her gaze. Dark and silent, the kind of emotion that comes from years of being unseen. Jackson didn't press, but something had shifted. His instincts stirred. Numbers didn't explain this. Margins didn't measure pain. Reports didn't chart how a person folded themselves into silence. He pushed his cart forward, his feet moving even as his mind clung to her image. Why did someone so devoted look so worn? So unnoticed? As the diner stirred awake, Jackson stayed close. He watched as noise returned, metal clanging, voices rising. But through it all, Tessa moved like a shadow. She wiped a clean table again, her cloth moving in slow, deliberate circles. No one thanked her. A napkin slipped from another server's tray. Tessa bent, picked it up, threw it away. No glance, no recognition. A high chair in the corner was still sticky from yesterday. She scrubbed until the wood gleamed. A co-worker rushed past her, nearly knocking over her bucket. No apology. She simply adjusted her grip and moved on. At the kitchen pass, a pan hissed with steam. "Careful," she called softly, her voice like a thread of kindness. It vanished in the clamor. No one responded. She nodded to herself and went back to stacking plates. The rhythm repeated. Kindness answered with indifference. Help offered, unnoticed. She moved from counter to table to sink. No pause, no thanks. Around her, co-workers exchanged jokes, smiled, touched shoulders. None of it reached her. She existed at the edge of their vision, like part of the furniture or the humming of old lights, always there, never seen. And yet, Jackson couldn't look away. There was grace in her resilience, a quiet dignity in how she kept showing up, how she gave her best when no one was looking. She was invisible, and yet she carried more of the place than anyone else. Jackson remembered the word he saw stitched into one apron. Invisible. But now it wasn't ink on fabric. It was a person. It was her. Each morning, long before anyone else, she arrived. Not because she had to, but because she needed to. 3 hours before her shift, like a soul returning to a sanctuary, she slipped through the quiet doors. The break room became a chapel of motion. She sat with her aprons, rows of burgundy cloth lined like offerings. Her hands moved with practiced reverence. Smooth, fold, align, stack. Each movement exact, unhurried. A rhythm born of solitude. And then her voice, soft, wavering, rose in a hum. Not a song, not quite a lullaby, but something sorrowful beneath the melody. At times her hand would stop, and she'd exhale a breath far too heavy for someone so young. Then she'd reach into her pocket, and out came a pen. Jackson nearly missed it. She leaned close, drew a tiny mark inside the waistband of an apron. A word, maybe a sentence, disappearing as the cloth folded back, a secret stitched in silence. When she finished, she smiled. Not for anyone else, just for herself. It was a faint private thing, fragile, then gone. She folded the apron, placed it on the pile, and reached for the next. Fold, human, pause, write, smile, continue. Jackson remained in the doorway, rooted. He didn't speak, he didn't interrupt. Because this wasn't just routine. This was something else entirely. This was her way of staying whole. This was resilience disguised as ritual. And in every apron, she left behind a piece of herself, something precious, invisible, and entirely hers. Jackson, more than anyone else, knew what he was seeing wasn't just habit. It was hiding. It was endurance masked as order. No one else seemed to notice the details. The schedule said 6 a.m., but she had been here since 4 a.m. Folding, humming, as if the world had never stopped spinning for her, as if time bowed around her grief. Why spend precious hours on aprons when sleep was scarce? Why treat fabric like it held confessions? Jackson leaned back against the cold wall, letting those questions settle deep. She wasn't just working early. She was preparing herself to survive something bigger than the shift ahead. Her eyes caught his again. They lit up when she spoke of familiar orders. Mrs. Patterson's coffee, Tommy's eggs, but dulled when silence returned, as if even joy required permission. He remembered those eyes. Not hers specifically, but what they represented. It was a look he once wore, the same dimming when someone asked what his life was worth, the same forced smile when he whispered, "It just pays the bills," hoping no one would look closer. Suddenly he was 16 again, feet aching in 2 small shoes, hands raw from soap, standing in the steam of a dish pit. Back then, he was invisible too, just the kid who made plates shine. People had laughed. "Is this all you'll be?" And yet, he stayed. Because invisible or not, work was a kind of purpose. And looking at her now, he didn't see a waitress. He saw himself, stitched into the seams of every fold she pressed. Each crease she smoothed echoed the silence he once carried. She wasn't merely working. She was preserving herself, one apron, 1 minute at a time. She was hiding something. That much he knew. The writing, the rituals, the quiet, deliberate control. This wasn't random. It was a language. One no one else had bothered to learn, and in that moment, something inside him solidified. He would not look away, not this time. He had missed it before, in other people, in other stories, but not her, not now. If he walked away, she'd remain unseen, folded into the background of a failing diner like so many others before her. But she wasn't forgettable. She was trying to be seen without asking. So he made a silent promise. He would watch, he would wait, and when the time came, he would understand what she'd been trying to say through thread and ink. That promise was broken abruptly by the click of expensive shoes against tile. Craig entered like a theater actor, all performance and posture. His smile was wide but hollow, the kind that stretched just a little too far to be real. Hair slicked back to a mirror shine. He carried himself like every room was his, like every person should be grateful to exist in his orbit. He was late, but offered no apology. Instead, he strolled through the diner like a king inspecting his kingdom, brushing his fingertips over tables as if testing for loyalty, not dust. He paused, frowned, then gave a self-satisfied nod, as if the chairs had passed inspection. "Sarah," he said, syrup in his voice as he leaned toward the youngest server. She flushed, confused whether to smile or retreat. But the warmth in Craig's voice vanished the moment the kitchen door swung. 3 minutes late. His bark was sharp enough to cut air. "Do I need to teach you people how to boil eggs?" Pots clanged, and the room seemed to shrink. Tessa, mid-wipe at an already spotless counter, flinched. His eyes locked on her with disdain. "Still not finished? Customers notice laziness." The words hit like stones. She nodded, shrinking further, her hands moving faster though nothing was left to clean. The atmosphere around Craig darkened. Laughter faded. Conversations died. Even the line cook, usually humming, stilled. It was as if the very walls braced themselves. Jackson observed it all, his mop gliding in silent rhythm. Honeyed words to Sarah, venom for Tessa, thunder for the kitchen. It wasn't management, it was manipulation. Theater designed to keep people in place, and Jackson felt the weight of it crawl up his spine. This wasn't a failing business. It was sabotage. This man, Craig, was the rot, and now it had a face. Tessa was back in motion, shoulders set, voice steady. She rattled off 8 meals, various sides, drinks, 1 milkshake. She balanced trays not with grace, but with survival, like a soldier carrying too much through a battlefield. Plates clinked, Coffee sloshed. No one helped her. Servers looked away. The cook didn't flinch. Craig scrolled through his phone. She walked a gauntlet of indifference. Then, just as she crossed the center aisle, her shoe caught a slick patch. The tray wobbled. Plates slid against each other. For a heartbeat, disaster hovered. Jackson's breath hitched, but Tessa moved like someone who had slipped before. Her knees bent, arm adjusted. She shifted weight like a dancer in the middle of collapse. She saved every single dish. And when she set the tray down, perfectly intact. The table clapped once. Not in gratitude, in amusement, as if they'd almost seen a crash. Tessa smiled. That practiced smile. Then turned back to the kitchen. No thanks, no praise. Her hair had fallen loose. Sweat lined her hairline. She didn't stop. She wiped her hands, grabbed another slip, and kept going. Jackson's grip tightened on the mop. This wasn't just hard work. This was quiet strength stretched to its edge. Then came the next order, just a refill. Tessa moved quickly, pot in hand, steam rising. She poured gently. The man frowned. Cold, he said, pushing it away. I asked for hot coffee. She leaned forward. I'm sorry, sir. Let me make a new pot. Just a moment. She turned, already reaching for the fresh grounds when Craig's voice whipped through the room. Of course it's wrong, he said loudly, eyes gleaming. It's always wrong when you make it. Everything stopped. A silence like static. Customers turned. Some raised eyebrows. Some looked away. Tessa didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She simply whispered, "Yes, sir," and moved back toward the machine. Even the customer looked confused, his eyes darting from her to Craig, unsure who he was supposed to side with. He opened his mouth to say something, but then stopped. Sarah stepped in, smiling too brightly, voice sweet. I'll take care of it. She poured from the same pot and handed it off like a magician performing sleight of hand. Craig beamed. That's the way. Quick and easy, you always get it right. He patted her shoulder, smug and dismissive, then turned away from Tessa like she didn't exist. In the corner, Jackson's hand closed around the mop handle so tight the wood groaned under pressure. His knuckles whitened. A quiet fury rose, not just at the insult, but at the ease with which it was delivered, the silence that followed, and the way no one stopped it. He had seen hardship before, but this was different. This was cruelty in plain sight, and it was time someone did something about it. Jackson didn't feel the rage rise because of a lukewarm cup of coffee. It wasn't the customer's complaint or even the sting of poor service. It was the cruelty, the effortless, public cruelty that tipped him over. This wasn't just a management flaw or a staffing issue. This was how dignity quietly leaked out of a place, one insult at a time, spoken with enough volume to remind everyone watching who mattered and who didn't. The lunch rush faded in scattered fragments. Unfinished conversations, forks clinking without rhythm, fatigue dragging across the floor like spilled syrup. Jackson slipped away into the changing room, using his cart as cover. Inside, the air was still, thick with the scent of detergent and tired metal lockers. Against the far wall stood the stack of burgundy aprons, each folded like offerings at a forgotten altar. He picked up the one on top. The fabric was stiff, worn by time and sweat. Grease stains lingered near the hem. The strap had been mended, carefully, lovingly, by hand. But it was what he saw on the inside that made him freeze. Tiny writing curved into the lining, so small it could have been missed entirely. September 25th. Double shift. Nearly fainted. No one asked if I was okay. The words weren't dramatic. They weren't meant to be seen, but their quiet pain was unmistakable. Jackson's chest tightened. This wasn't a routine. This was a journal, stitched into fabric. He reached for another. November 22nd. Worked Thanksgiving alone. Ink pressed into cotton like a scar. He stared. barely breathing. She had been writing this for months, maybe longer, a record of moments no one else cared to remember. Jackson imagined her there in the early morning hush, pen in hand, head bent like a monk at confession, writing not for the world, but for herself, a secret ledger of endurance. He whispered into the silence, "She's writing a diary into the aprons." It felt sacred and unbearable all at once. One by one, he read them, each line a soft cry folded into cotton. October 12th. They called me invisible. I smiled. He read that one twice. Then again. The word echoed through his mind like a church bell. Invisible. He could hear the laughter that must have come after, the way they said it like a joke, as if her effort, her hours, her exhaustion meant nothing. A memory crashed into him, his uncle sneering across a dinner table when Jackson was still just a boy scrubbing plates. All that work, and no one even sees you. It lived in him still, that bitterness, and now it lived in her. He clutched the apron, knuckles white, but then he saw it again. Those final words. I smiled. He almost couldn't bear it. To smile in the face of neglect. To absorb humiliation and answer with grace. That wasn't weakness. That was strength turned inward, sharp enough to be armor. This girl, he muttered, voice rough with grief. She's not working, she's surviving. Every scribbled note became evidence, not just of long shifts and loneliness, but of humanity. Stubborn, scarred, enduring. In that moment, the line between owner and employee vanished. He was no longer undercover. He was no longer pretending. He was a witness now, staring into the truth of someone his world had failed. When the afternoon shift began, Jackson watched through a new lens. Sarah floated through the bright part of the diner, the sun catching her smile, customers laughing as she passed. Her trays were light, her tables friendly, her tips generous. In the back, where shadows clung to corners and the buzz of the kitchen drowned voices, Tessa moved like a ghost. Her section was a minefield, crying toddlers, impatient parents, cold coffee refills. She never complained. She worked like someone who had no other option. Bent shoulders, measured steps, silent endurance. Then Sarah dropped a plate. It shattered. Before she could bend to retrieve it, Craig materialized beside her. "Don't worry," he cooed, brushing a shard aside. "Accidents happen. You're doing great." His hand lingered on her arm just long enough to draw a blush. Jackson's teeth clenched. Moments later, Tessa staggered under a tray packed far too high. 6 plates, drinks teetering on the edge. Her foot caught on a loose chair leg. She stumbled. Jackson's body tensed. So did Craig's, but only for a second. Then he looked at his watch and kept walking. The tray landed safely. No food spilled, no applause. A distracted dad mumbled, "Thanks," without looking up. At the register, Sarah laughed with 2 other servers. Tessa walked by without a glance. No one noticed the sweat on her brow or how her hands trembled slightly when she wiped them on her apron. This wasn't poor staffing. It was deliberate. Favoritism wrapped in authority. Kindness given to those who pleased Craig. Silence for those who didn't. Jackson's pulse burned. The word from the apron screamed inside him. Invisible. Then it happened. A man slumped in a corner booth, reeking of liquor, shirt stained with old grease. He waved at Tessa, leering. "Hey, sweetheart," he slurred. "Bring me another, or better yet, sit with me while I drink it." Tessa didn't flinch. She smoothed her apron like armor. "I'll get you some water first," she replied, voice even. She turned. His hand shot out. He grabbed her wrist, hard. The tray rattled. "Don't walk away from me," he spat. "What? You too good for a guy like me?" Chairs scraped. Customers turned. Whispers rippled. But no one stood. No one moved. Jackson almost did. He was halfway to the floor when Craig arrived, shouting, "Out, now!" Craig dragged the man to the door, shoving him out into the night. For a moment, relief passed through the diner like wind. Jackson almost thought Craig had done the right thing, until Craig turned. His eyes landed on Tessa. "You should have handled that sooner," he snapped. "Letting it get that far just makes a scene." Her face drained of color. She bowed her head. "Yes, sir," she whispered. No one defended her. The injustice sat in the air like smoke. It clung to everything. Later, Sarah approached Craig quietly. "It wasn't Tessa's fault," she said. "That guy was awful." Craig didn't blink. He smiled thinly, a knife's edge beneath his teeth. "She brings it on herself," he said. "Always does. No presence, no leadership, just weakness." Sarah recoiled. Her face shifted, as though she wanted to say something, but she didn't. She nodded, backed away. At that exact moment, Tessa walked past, carrying a tray toward the kitchen. She heard it. Her body stiffened. Her steps quickened. She didn't look up. Jackson saw it all. The smirk, the lie, the collapse behind her eyes. His fingers trembled on the mop handle. Every instinct screamed to drop the act, to storm over, to shout in her defense. But he didn't. Not yet. Because rage wasn't enough. Not this time. He needed more than emotion. He needed proof. He needed them to hear her story, not from his lips, but from hers. From the fabric. From the silence. Because Craig thought no one was watching. But Jackson was, and he would remember everything. Jackson seized the quiet like a man chasing breath underwater. He slipped once, more into the changing room, heart pounding with urgency. The aprons were still there, folded not just with care, but with reverence, as though the fabric bore memories too sacred for careless hands. But this time, he didn't stop at one. One by one he lifted them. Cotton squares, stained and softened by labor, revealing piece after piece of a hidden world. May 18th. Stuck in the broken heater section, sweated through the shift. No one offered help. Then another, the handwriting looser, as if written between orders. July 30th. A child drew me a rainbow, slipped it into my pocket, kept it all day. He froze on the next. It was stitched with the kind of tenderness that felt too vulnerable for words. March 8th. Mom called. Her cancer treatment is improving. I cried after my shift. Jackson sat down, breath jagged. He could feel her, the way she held sorrow and strength in the same hand, as if the only way to survive was to make even pain feel ordinary. These notes weren't curated. They weren't written to be found or admired. They were fragments of existence, some heavy, some light, but all of them honest. An entire life hidden inside garments the world considered disposable. He carefully refolded each apron, restoring the order she had given them, like putting sacred pages back into a sacred book. His hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the intimacy of it all. He wasn't just seeing her exhaustion now. He was holding her soul, her heartbreak, her resilience. "It's not a secret anymore," he whispered, staring at the stack. "It's her soul buried here." That evening, the air hung still outside the diner as he stood with his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in hushed tones under the guise of Jackson Johnson, the janitor. "Can you check something for me?" he asked the HR officer. "Tessa Morgan, what's on file?" There was a pause. Then the sound of clicking keys. "She graduated top of her class, hospitality management, full ride, letters of recommendation glowing." Another pause. "She applied here for an assistant manager role, but nothing beyond the basic hire paperwork." "What about the resume, the application?" "Nothing ever reached us," came the reply, blunt and cold. "We assumed she changed her mind." Jackson felt the blood drain from his face. She hadn't changed her mind. Craig had changed her future. The file hadn't vanished. It had been buried, silenced. He clenched his fist around the phone as the pieces fell together. Tessa, driven, educated, and overqualified, denied even the chance to try. Not because she lacked the talent, but because her quiet strength made someone like Craig feel small. She should have been leading, Jackson muttered, voice thick with fury. She should have been at the helm from day one. This wasn't just neglect. This was sabotage. This was fear, dressed in authority. All those stitched notes, all those silent acts of grace, they weren't just stories of being overlooked. They were the cries of someone robbed of what she'd earned. The disguise he wore felt heavier now, like betrayal on his back. He walked back into the diner not as a man hiding, but as a man on a mission. That night, the place quieted into a hum of neon and exhaustion. Jackson lingered, watching from the shadows. In the break room, Tessa sat with a pen trembling between her fingers. She stared at a blank sheet for a long while, then slowly began to write. Each letter was shaped like it cost her something. At the end, she paused. Then, with a breath so delicate it almost broke, she signed her name, folded the paper, slipped it into her apron. Jackson didn't need to ask. It was her resignation. Her face remained still, lips set in a line. But her eyes, they screamed. They were hollow, dimmed by defeat. And when she whispered, "No reason left to stay," the sound pierced him deeper than any shout ever could. He had read her diary of ink and fabric. He had felt her tenacity between each thread. Now he was watching it fade. He wanted to run to her, tell her not to quit, that she mattered, that everything would change. But his disguise still held him hostage. So he stood frozen, chest tight, whispering words only the silence could hear. "I can't let this happen." Because if she walked away now, it wouldn't just be the loss of a worker. It would be the loss of the only light that had endured in that place. And it would mean he had failed to do what he came for. The next morning cracked open with the clatter of a door and a child's uncontainable joy. "There she is." Tommy's voice rang out, piercing the hush of early morning. "My superhero?" Tessa turned. Her face broke into a real smile. Not polite, not rehearsed. Real. She knelt beside him. "Back again, huh?" she teased. "Let me guess. Extra whipped cream today?" Tommy nodded, bouncing. His parents laughed softly behind him, grateful. Later, she returned with the drink, steam curling above a mountain of whipped cream. Alongside it, a plate of sandwiches cut into triangles. "Special order," she winked. "You're the best waitress ever," he declared. And just like that, something shifted. Color flushed into her cheeks. Her smile bloomed, not out of habit, but out of truth. Jackson saw it from across the room and felt breath fill his lungs again. This moment was proof. To spreadsheets and executives, she was invisible. But to a child with no bias, no agenda, she was magic. Kindness had made her extraordinary. He leaned back, heart clenched in awe. Because there, kneeling by the booth, was not a forgotten worker. It was Tessa, alive, radiant, unburdened. For a brief, fragile second, the weight had lifted. The cruelty, the hierarchy, the silences, they didn't exist in that moment. Just a boy and his hero. He recalled Craig's venom, the manipulation, the way he had buried her spirit beneath criticism and dismissal. And now, seeing her light, undeniable, warm, irreplaceable, Jackson knew what had to be done. "She doesn't need to disappear," he said, voice firm, low. "She needs to be seen." And this time, he wasn't just observing. He was ready to act. If he stayed quiet now, she would leave. Her resignation folded neatly beside her heart, her spirit packed into cotton like all the silent strength she had worn for months. Number Jackson would not let that happen. Not tomorrow, not eventually. Now his eyes stayed fixed on her, on the radiant smile that had bloomed just for a boy who saw her as a superhero. That smile didn't belong in the corner of a break room. It belonged on a stage, lit by dignity and earned recognition. And in that smile, Jackson found the clarity he had been chasing since the day he stepped into Murphy's as a ghost. This was the moment. Inside the break room, Laughter rang thin and metallic. Trays clattered. Craig sat at the center like a self-appointed king, voice booming with artificial charm. "I've decided," he declared. "It's time to name a new assistant manager." Sarah, blinking in surprise, looked up from her seat. "What about Tessa?" Craig didn't miss a beat. His smile curved, lips curling into something twisted. "Tessa." He let the name linger in the air like a joke everyone was supposed to get. "She's invisible. No presence, no leadership. She'll never be more than background noise." The words struck like open slaps. A few employees shifted. One or two nodded faintly, eager to stay on Craig's good side. Most kept their eyes down, retreating behind silence, their only defense. And then Tessa walked in. She held her apron folded neatly, like always. Her pace faltered just a beat, catching his words mid-air. She didn't say anything, didn't cry. But Jackson saw it. The light that had returned to her earlier, just hours ago, flickered and vanished. She lowered her eyes and walked past. Craig laughed, as if he'd told the punchline to a joke only he found funny. Jackson's hands curled into fists under the table. The same rage he had buried for years began to boil. Each word Craig spoke wasn't just an insult to Tessa. It was a blow against every dishwasher, every janitor, every unseen worker who had been made to feel small. This wasn't ignorance. It was intentional, precise, cruel. And Craig had chosen to make it public. So would Jackson. That night, long after the lights dimmed and chairs were stacked, Jackson sat behind the wheel of his old car, staring into nothing. The memory of Craig's sneer, of Tessa's bowed head, of the silence, it all pressed against him like lead on his chest. He made the call. "I need everything," he told HR. "Resume, transcripts, the missing application, and get clearance for a director-level meeting this week." He hung up and flipped open his notebook. He wrote until the pages trembled in his hand. Dates, witnesses, quotes, recordings. He slipped back into the diner and photographed each apron note, each fragile line Tessa had etched into cloth. He had Craig's voice too, recorded mockery of her being invisible. Brick by brick, he built the wall. A wall Craig wouldn't climb over. Sleep never came that night. Jackson lay in the stale air of his motel room, eyes wide in the dark, the ceiling fan above creaking like time running out. He whispered into the stillness, a vow. "You won't disappear. Not while I'm here. I swear it." At dawn, he dressed. This time, the uniform didn't feel like a disguise. It felt like armor. The morning was gray, the sky heavy, matching the weight in Jackson's chest. He arrived early, hoping to breathe, but froze at the sight inside the break room. Tessa sat alone. The aprons were folded beside her, each one an offering of ritual. But her face told another story. Eyes rimmed red, fingers trembling over a single sheet of paper laid on the table, her resignation letter. Not hidden this time, not whispered in ink. Right there, plain and final. She looked up and gave him a faint smile. It broke something inside him. "I'll hand it in after the meeting," she whispered. The words landed like a bell tolling the end. "I've given all I can," she said softly. The smile she wore wasn't one of peace. It was the kind you give when you're too tired to cry. He wanted to stop her, to speak, to tear the letter to pieces, but his moment hadn't come. The trap wasn't set yet. So he nodded once, jaw locked tight, and walked away with a storm building in his chest. Before he left, something made him glance once more at the stack of aprons. He reached out, his fingers brushing familiar cotton. March 17th. "I almost quit, but a child called me a superhero." Jackson's heart stopped. He could see Tommy's face in his mind, the way the boy's eyes lit up, the way his voice rang through the diner. Tessa had laughed then, truly laughed. And that joy, that one thread, was what had kept her from leaving. He clutched the apron. That joy was the last string tying her to this place. It was nearly broken. He stepped outside into the gray morning, pulled out his phone, and called again. "We move today," he told HR. "Get the director in the room, no delays." The rain hadn't started yet, but the air smelled like change. At 2 o'clock, the meeting room filled. Chairs scraped. Coffee steamed in forgotten cups. Faces hovered between boredom and apprehension. Craig took center stage, all smiles, posture puffed with practiced confidence. "Just a routine update," he said. "Let's get through it." Sarah sat near the front, eyes lowered. Others murmured, unsure what to expect. And at the back, near the wall, Tessa stood, holding her letter. Her hand was white-knuckled, the folded edge crumpled in her fist. Behind them all, Jackson waited, cap low, stance humble, watching. Across the table, the HR director, Janet, sat, silently. No introduction, no announcement, just a closed notebook on her lap, and a sharp eye on Craig. He didn't notice her. Not yet. Craig glanced around the room, smirking. "See? Easy, quick, no drama." And still, he didn't see the trap already wrapped around him. The air shifted. The silence thickened. Jackson's pulse thundered. The game was almost over. And Craig, basking in power he didn't realize he had already lost, had no idea that today he was the one about to become invisible. Craig's voice rolled on thick and theatrical, drenched in self-importance. He rambled on about policy updates, about productivity and procedures, as though his voice alone could brand order into the bones of the building. But his words, no matter how loud, echoed hollow. Until suddenly, a quieter voice sliced through the noise, calm, measured, unmistakably in control. "This meeting will have a slight change." Every head turned. At the edge of the room, the janitor, the man in the faded cap and mop-stained shoes, stepped forward. Jackson's stance had changed, no longer hunched, no longer quiet. There was a weight to him now, a steel beneath the humility. Craig frowned, irritated. "Excuse me? This is for staff." But the words caught midair as Jackson reached up, removed the cap, and stood straighter. "My name is Jackson Harrington," he said, voice crisp, unapologetic. "Owner of this restaurant, and every other that bears the Harrington name." Silence dropped like a curtain. A collective gasp echoed, followed by the scrape of chairs, shifting bodies, wide eyes blinking in disbelief. Even the ceiling fan seemed to stop spinning. Tessa stood frozen. The resignation letter slipped from her hands like a feather, drifting to the floor. Her lips parted, but formed no words. She stared at him, confusion and recognition twisting through her expression. She had known this man as a shadow. Now, he stood lit by truth. Craig stepped back, caught mid-breath, his smirk crumbling into something brittle. The ground under him shifted, but no one rushed to steady him. Jackson turned to the staff, eyes steady, voice unwavering. "You only show respect when you see power," he said, gaze locking on Craig. "To everyone else, you show contempt." The words hit like thunder. Murmurs broke out. Hands rose to cover mouths, glances exchanged. For the first time, Jackson spoke what everyone had only dared to think. Tessa stood motionless, eyes wide with shock. Sarah turned toward her, and something shifted in her face. Not pity, but understanding. Solidarity. From the back, Janet rose without a word, a thick folder tucked under her arm. She didn't need to speak. Her presence alone silenced the room. Every footstep she took toward the front sounded like a gavel dropping. Craig tugged at his collar, beads of sweat forming. The bravado drained from his face. Jackson took the folder and began laying documents on the table, each one a blow more devastating than the last. "These," he said, laying out Tessa's missing promotion requests, "were buried." Then came the falsified performance review. "Signed by you, filled with lies to erase her progress." Craig opened his mouth, but no words came. And this Jackson continued, lifting an apron from the table, "is the truth you didn't account for." He read aloud. October 12th. They called me invisible. I smiled. The sentence landed like a stone dropped into still water. It rippled through the room. Some staff gasped. One of the dishwashers wiped his eye and whispered, "She really wrote that." Others nodded, eyes glossy with regret. Craig sputtered, "These are just notes." Taken out of context, "No, Mr. Craig." Janet's voice was razor sharp. "The handwriting has been verified. The files lead directly to your desk. This is not confusion. This is obstruction and abuse." The room stirred, murmurs growing louder, outrage rising like a tide. Faces once dim with fear now burned with fury. Craig stumbled back under the weight of it all. But Jackson wasn't done. "You've poisoned this place," he said, voice low but forceful. "You destroyed trust, silenced good people, and you made dignity a stranger." He paused, letting the moment sink deep. "You are permanently suspended. Effective immediately." The room stilled. Then, slowly, eyes turned away from Craig. Not a soul stood up for him. 2 uniformed guards entered quietly, stepping forward as Jackson nodded. Craig twisted, shouting, "You can't do this. I kept this place running. You'll regret it." But no one listened. Even his voice seemed smaller now, strangled by the silence. The guards took him by the arms. He fought, he cursed, but power had already slipped from his hands like dust. He was escorted through the same door he had walked through so many times, with swagger. Only this time, no one looked impressed. They watched in silence, a verdict without applause. As the door slammed behind him, a sound sharp and final, the entire diner seemed to exhale. The silence that followed was different. Not suffocating, but tender, like the stillness after a long storm has passed. Then, quietly, eyes turned. Not toward Jackson, but toward Tessa. She sat stiffly, her hands folded tight in her lap, as if her body hadn't caught up with what had just happened. Her gaze was locked on the place Craig had stood moments ago, unable to believe he was truly gone. And then, the shift happened. One server lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry, Tessa," she whispered. Another nodded. "We should have spoken up." The words were soft, but they landed with the weight of recognition. Tessa lifted her face slowly, tears still wet on her cheeks. For the first time, she was not looking down. Janet stepped closer, her voice gentle. "Today is the beginning of something better," she said. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore." Beside her, Sarah stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Tessa. It wasn't pity. It was a vow, and it was shared in silence by every person in the room who had once stayed quiet, who now saw her. Jackson moved closer, kneeling beside her, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "You've carried more than anyone should ever have to," he said softly, "but no one will ever erase you again." She looked up at him, and for the first time, her eyes didn't hold fear or disbelief. They held light. She was no longer invisible. She was seen, and the story was only just beginning. In that fragile hush, she finally stepped out of the shadows. Jackson pulled a chair close and sank down, aligning his eyes with hers. He didn't loom over her. He didn't speak from above. He simply settled there, a quiet equal, anchoring the storm that still hummed in the room. Everyone leaned in, not moving but held by the sudden gravity of the moment. "Your words," he said softly, low, calm, the ones stitched into those aprons, hidden where no one cared to look. Her breath caught. She gripped the chair's edge, knuckles pale. Jackson held her gaze. "They opened my eyes," she whispered. Her voice trembled like a leaf in a storm. "You are not just a server," Jackson continued, steady. "You are the soul of this place. Every note you wrote, every kindness when no one was watching. You kept this diner alive when everything else threatened to fall apart." Her lips quivered. I just wanted to do my job well." Jackson shook his head slowly. eyes warm and unwavering. Number you did far more. You carried dignity in silence. You carried respect even when they denied it to you. That is leadership, Tessa, even if they tried to erase you. From the back, Janet stepped forward, folder in hand. She laid it on the table deliberately, with quiet power. "We have something for you," she said. "A proposal." Tessa's eyes widened, darting from Janet to Jackson, as though waiting for the world to snatch away this hopeful moment. The room held its breath. Jackson reached forward, resting his hand lightly over hers. "You've lived unseen for too long. Starting today, you won't be invisible. You will lead." The promise hovered there, fragile yet unbreakable, and for the first time, Tessa allowed herself to believe. Jackson took the folder. "We want you," he announced, voice steady, "to become our employee welfare coordinator." A hush fell, then murmurs rippled through the staff, surprise mingling with recognition. They looked at her differently now, no longer with pity, but with admiration. Jackson leaned in, his gesture gentle and grounding. "You don't deserve it, Tessa," he clarified, voice unwavering. "You've earned it." Tears welled and rolled down her cheeks, her shoulders trembling. Janet stepped forward again, voice calm but resolved. "This isn't charity," she said. "This is acknowledgement. You've been holding the heart of this team, even while you were treated as invisible. We're simply giving your role the name it deserved." Staff exchanged looks, those previously distant now nodding with tenderness and respect. Tessa stared at the folder, at Jackson, at Janet, her breath unsteady, as if the moment might slip away. "I don't know if I deserve this," she managed. Jackson leaned closer. "You don't deserve it," he said gently. "You earned it." Then Sarah stood, voice trembling but clear. "He's right. If it weren't for Tessa, this place would have fallen a long time ago. She carried us when no one even noticed." They clapped, first soft, then building into a wave of quiet applause that filled the heart of the diner. Tessa's smile broke free. Fragile, radiant, real. "I was invisible for so long," she whispered. "And now you're telling me I've been leading all along." Jackson placed his hand over hers. "The hardest leaders are the ones who serve quietly, expecting nothing. That's who you are. And now the world finally sees it." She exhaled, a sound heavy with release and rebirth. 2 weeks later, Jackson returned to Murphy's and was met by the sound of laughter, a melody threading through clatter and conversation. The air seemed lighter, brighter with possibility. Behind the counter, Tessa stood with a notebook in hand, orchestrating the morning shift with calm authority. Sarah leaned in for each instruction. Other staff mirrored her focus, attentive, engaged. On the walls, new posters declared, "Everyone's voice matters." A board bristled with colorful feedback from staff and customers alike. Suggestion cards rested at tables, already filled with ideas and warmth. Customers lingered longer, smiled more, and tips dropped generously into jars. A family waved at Tessa. She smiled, unforced, genuine. Jackson watched from the doorway. The diner that had once felt hollow now pulsed with warmth and life. Pride filled him, not of ownership, but from witnessing resilience bloom into leadership. Murphy's wasn't just repaired, it was reborn under her steady, unassuming hand. At 4 a.m., the diner was quiet again, not oppressive, but peaceful. Jackson pushed the back door open and found Tessa at the ritual table, folding aprons. Only this time, her shoulders were straight, her movements confident. The ritual wasn't survival, it was choice. He leaned in, peeking at the inside of an apron. Line of ink. Today, someone truly listened. His chest swelled. Next to it, a brand new tag was pinned. Your voice matters. It glowed under the soft kitchen light, a promise made visible. Tessa caught his eye and smiled, a real smile, the kind that reaches from the soul. It struck him more deeply than any confrontation had. She wasn't invisible any longer. She was seen. Jackson drew in a full breath, the kind that settles into the bones. The silent ritual that pulled grief from dawn had become a tapestry of hope. Grease and coffee still filled the air, but now it carried resilience, dignity, renewal. The hour wasn't lonely anymore. It felt sacred. Tessa folded the final apron of the morning and turned to him, quiet strength in her voice. "I want to visit every restaurant in this chain," she said. "Sit with the people no one sees, listen to the ones who feel invisible." Jackson felt the echo of his younger self, the 16-year-old who believed in triumph beyond the dish pit. He smiled, weathered but proud. "No," Tessa corrected gently. "We will change it." Sunlight spilled in. The diner filled, alive, with footsteps and laughter. One person to the next. Greetings warm, faces open. Jackson stood by the door, feeling decades of weight fall away. In his heart, a vow took root. No one will hide their tears in an apron again. Tessa wasn't just an employee nor a survivor of hardship. She was the beginning of something larger. And for the first time in years, he believed the future and the dignity of every unseen worker was bright and safe.